Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something ancient, sacred, and absolutely unforgiving, the sacred Bible. Not the Sunday school version you grew up with. The raw, gritty truth that Hollywood documentaries never show you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us on this spiritual journey. Now turn off all the lights. The screen will also dim in a moment to help you relax as you listen to tonight's story. Let's ease into our biblical journey together. Now you're in ancient times. The biblical world surrounds you, not in paintings or movies, but in smell, sound, and touch. The good news. You're here, witnessing biblical history in the making. The bad news: you probably won't survive until sunset. The air around you, thick with dust, smoke from cooking fires, and the unmistakable scent of too many people living without modern plumbing. Your bed isn't memory foam, it's just a thin mat on hard-packed dirt. No pillows, no sheets, just rough, woven fabric that scratches against your skin like sandpaper with a grudge. The sounds aren't gentle birdsong or your phone notifications. It's donkeys braying, merchants already shouting, children crying, and a dozen languages mixing in the streets. This isn't a Bible story anymore. This is survival, and you're already failing at it. Your eyes adjust to the harsh morning light as you take in your surroundings. The biblical world isn't the serene, sanitized imagery from illustrated Bibles or Sunday school lessons. It's a sensory assault. The ground beneath your feet isn't even, it's packed earth, worn by thousands of sandals and bare feet over generations, with stones that press painfully into your soles with every step. Modern shoes would stand out immediately, marking you as a stranger even before you speak. And you will need to speak. You'll need to ask for water, for food, for shelter, basic survival necessities. But the languages swirling around you aren't English or anything remotely familiar. Hebrew, Aramaic, snatches of Greek and Latin from passing merchants or soldiers. Your modern tongue is useless here, your words as foreign as your clothing. Even if you could communicate, people would regard you with immediate suspicion. Strangers weren't welcomed with open arms in most ancient settlements. They were potential threats, possible carriers of disease or misfortune. The sun beats down with an intensity that modern air conditioning has made you forget exists. This isn't a pleasant warmth, it's a punishing heat that cooks your skin and drains your energy within minutes. And there's no escape from it. No cool building to duck into, no refrigerated beverages to sip. Just relentless sunshine and the growing realization that sunscreen hasn't been invented yet. Your skin will burn, blister, and peel, adding physical misery to your cultural disorientation. But at least it's daytime. Night brings an altogether different terror. We've forgotten what true darkness is. In your modern world, there's always some ambient light: street lamps, device screens, the distant glow of the nearest town. Here, when night falls, it's a blackness so complete it feels like a physical weight pressing against your eyes. And in that darkness move threats, both human and animal, thieves, wild dogs, predators seeking easy prey. The night is when sickness often takes its final toll, when the weakest pass from this world with only the stars as witnesses. You can feel the weight of time here, not measured in minutes and seconds, but in sunrise and sunset, in seasons and harvests. There are no clocks on these mud brick walls, no calendars keeping track of appointments and deadlines. Time moves differently, measured by the growing shadows as the sun arcs across the sky, by the rumbling of your stomach, by the ache in your muscles after labor. Speaking of labor, you'd better be prepared to work. There are no unemployment benefits here, no social safety nets. If you don't contribute, you don't eat. And the work isn't typing at a keyboard, or attending Zoom meetings. It's back-breaking physical labor under that punishing sun, hauling water from wells, tending crops, herding livestock, building structures with primitive tools. Your modern body, accustomed to ergonomic chairs and limited physical exertion, would fail within hours. The smells intensify as the day progresses. Human sweat mingles with animal dung, with smoke from cooking fires, with the pungent aroma of fermentation and decay. Nothing is sanitized or deodorized. This is the authentic scent of human existence before modern hygiene, earthy, organic, occasionally revolting to your sensitive modern nose. You'd gag at first, but survival requires adaptation. Eventually you wouldn't notice anymore. Your own body would contribute to the olfactory landscape as you go days or weeks without proper bathing. Water, something you take for granted with every casual turn of a tap, is precious beyond measure here. Women walk miles to wells, carrying heavy clay jars on their heads or shoulders. The water itself isn't the clear, pathogen-free liquid you're accustomed to. It's often cloudy, collected from sources shared with animals, carrying microorganisms that could ravage your unprepared digestive system. You'd be desperately thirsty within hours of arrival, but drinking without caution means inviting dysentery or worse. Your body has no immunity to the local microscopic threats that the natives have partially adapted to over generations of exposure. Food is another shock to your system. Forget 3 meals a day with snacks in between. Most people in biblical times ate one substantial meal, with perhaps some bread to sustain them through the day's labor. And that meal isn't what you'd recognize as food. No perfectly shaped produce, no boneless, skinless protein, no variety of flavors and textures. It's basic sustenance, coarse bread that cracks your teeth on hidden grit from the millstones, thin stews of lentils or beans, occasional tough meat from animals worked to death or too old to be productive. The bread isn't the light, fluffy loaves from your local bakery. It's dense, heavy flatbread, often containing barley, which gives it a bitter taste. Sometimes it's so hard you'd need to soak it in water or oil just to avoid breaking your teeth. This isn't an occasional artisanal treat, it's your primary calorie source, day after day, meal after meal. The monotony alone would be psychological torture for your palate, accustomed to global cuisine available at a moment's notice. You look around at the people trying to blend in, to understand their world, but they don't look like the actors in biblical films: perfect teeth, clear skin, clean hair. Real biblical era humans show the marks of their harsh existence. Teeth are worn down or missing entirely, faces weathered by sun and wind into premature aging, bodies bent and twisted by untreated injuries and disease. Many bear scars from accidents, violence, or primitive medical treatments. Eyes that have never known corrective lenses squint against the sun or struggle to focus. There are no glasses here, no contacts. If your vision is poor, you simply adapt or suffer. And the children, not the clean, cherubic faces from storybooks. These children work alongside adults as soon as they're able. Their mortality rate is staggering by modern standards. Disease, accidents, malnutrition claim many before they reach adolescence. Mothers bear many children knowing that perhaps half might survive to adulthood. Childhood isn't a protected time of education and play. It's just a shorter version of the adult struggle for survival. The sounds continue to disorient you. No mechanical hums that form the background of modern life. No refrigerators cycling on and off. No distant traffic, no air conditioning units. Instead, it's all organic noise, human voices haggling in the marketplace. Animals communicating their hunger or distress, the crack of wood being split for fires, the rhythmic scraping of grain being ground between stones. At night, it's not complete silence either, dogs barking warnings to unseen threats. Babies crying from hunger or discomfort, the low conversations of those who can't sleep or who must keep watch. As you walk through this ancient setting, the ground itself feels wrong beneath your feet. It's not level or paved. It's packed earth in dry weather, becoming treacherous mud when it rains. Inside dwellings, floors might be tamped earth, covered with straw or reed mats, comfortable compared to outside, but still hosting countless insects and small creatures that emerge at night to feed. These aren't pests to be exterminated, they're just another unavoidable aspect of life, like the weather or the darkness. Speaking of insects, you've never experienced them like this. Flies swarm around any food or waste. Mosquitoes feast on your blood without the deterrent of modern repellents. Lice make their home in human hair regardless of cleanliness. And bedbugs infest sleeping mats, emerging at night for their blood meal. There are no sealed windows with screens, no chemical sprays, no systematic pest control. The bugs have the advantage here, and your modern skin, never toughened by constant exposure, would be a map of bites and stings within days. Your entire sense of privacy would be violated constantly. Modern Western concepts of personal space don't exist. Families sleep together in single rooms, often sharing space with animals during cold weather. Bodily functions aren't hidden behind closed doors with exhaust fans, they're conducted in designated areas, but without our modern sensibilities of complete seclusion. Conversations are overheard, arguments witnessed, marriages consummated with only symbolic privacy. Being alone is rare, and sometimes suspicious. Community is survival, isolation is vulnerability. As the day progresses, you notice another absence. There are no clocks, no schedules, no precise appointments. Time is marked by the sun's position, by prayer times, instead, by the rhythm of work and rest. Minutes and seconds have no meaning. It's before midday or after, before the evening meal or after, before the new moon or after. The precision that structures your modern existence is completely absent, replaced by a flow of time that feels both more natural and more disorienting. The biblical world operates on relationships rather than transactions. There's no popping into a store for anonymous commerce. Every exchange is personal, often preceded by inquiries about family health, local events. Buying and selling involves negotiation, relationship building, social obligations. You can't just hand over currency and walk away with goods. You need to establish trust, demonstrate that you belong within the community's social framework. As an obvious outsider, these networks would be closed to you, leaving you without access to even basic necessities. Currency itself would confuse you. No standardized global system, no credit cards, no digital transfers. Different regions use different coins, different weights of precious metals, different systems of barter and exchange. The money in your pocket is worthless here, strange stamped pieces of metal with no recognized authority behind them. Wealth isn't in bank accounts but in tangible assets, land, livestock, stored grain, family connections. The poorest person in your modern world likely has more actual cash than many prosperous biblical-era families. The concept of medical care bears no resemblance to what you know. There are no hospitals, no ambulances, no emergency rooms. Injuries and illnesses are treated with herbal remedies of varying effectiveness, with prayers and religious rituals, sometimes with procedures that cause more harm than good. A simple infection that modern antibiotics would clear in days can be a death sentence here. Childbirth is perilous. Chronic conditions are endured rather than managed. Pain relief consists of alcohol or opium, if available at all. Your knowledge of germ theory and basic first aid might seem like miraculous wisdom, but without modern medical supplies, you'd be nearly as helpless as everyone else. Religion permeates everything in ways your secular or compartmentalized modern mind would struggle to comprehend. It's not a Sunday activity or personal choice, it's the framework that explains the world, that dictates daily activities, that structures society from top to bottom. Rituals aren't optional expressions of faith, but essential practices for survival and prosperity. Gods or God aren't distant concepts, but immediate presences believed to intervene directly in human affairs, requiring constant propitiation and attention, even if you share the nominal religion of the time and place. Your understanding and expression of it would mark you as dangerously different. The very concept of identity differs fundamentally. You understand yourself as an individual with personal rights, choices, and a unique path. In the biblical world, identity is communal. You are first and foremost a member of your family, your tribe, your people. Your actions reflect not just on you, but on your entire group. Behaviors that only affect you in the modern world have communal consequences here. The radical individual freedom you take for granted isn't just absent, it's incomprehensible and threatening to the social order. As you try to navigate this alien landscape that only looked familiar in carefully curated religious imagery, you realize that survival requires more than physical adaptation. It demands a complete rewiring of your fundamental assumptions about reality, about what it means to be human, about your place in the world. The psychological strain alone would break many modern people long before hunger or disease claimed them. The homes around you bear no resemblance to the structures you know. No glass windows, no insulation, no climate control. Walls of mud brick or rough stone provide basic shelter, but little comfort. Roofs of thatch or packed clay keep out some rain but harbor pests. Light comes from narrow openings or oil lamps that fill the space with smoke and provide only the dimmest illumination. Heat comes from fire pits that risk burns and asphyxiation in poorly ventilated spaces. In summer, the interiors become ovens. In winter, they remain cold and damp despite the fires. There is no escape from the elements, just slight mitigation of their harshest effects. Even the air you breathe is fundamentally different. No industrial pollutants, true, but filled with smoke from countless cooking and heating fires, dust kicked up by animals and humans. Pollen and spores at levels that would trigger allergic reactions in many modern people. Your lungs, accustomed to filtered air conditioning and heating, would struggle with the constant irritation. Respiratory infections spread unchecked through communities, claiming the very young and very old with seasonal regularity. Your very appearance marks you as not belonging. Your height, likely several inches taller than average due to modern nutrition, makes you stand out immediately. Your skin, whether paler or darker than the local population, lacks the weathering of constant outdoor exposure. Your hands show no calluses from daily labor. Your posture and gait, shaped by modern furniture and footwear, move wrong to native eyes. Before you speak a word, everyone knows you don't belong, triggering the deep xenophobia that was often essential for community survival in ancient times. The constant presence of death would perhaps be the most profound shock to your modern sensibilities. Death isn't hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes, it's an everyday occurrence witnessed by all. Bodies are prepared for burial by family members, not professional morticians. Graves are dug by friends and relatives, not cemetery staff. Children observe their grandparents' final moments, help wash their bodies, carry them to burial grounds. The psychological buffer zone that modern Western culture places between the living and the dead doesn't exist. Mortality isn't an abstract concept, but a daily reality that shapes every aspect of life. Your understanding of cleanliness collides head-on with biblical reality. There are religious purification rituals, yes, but the concept of germ-free surfaces, of antibacterial soaps, of sterilized environments, these don't exist. Food is prepared on surfaces that have never been disinfected, with hands that have touched animals, waste, dead things, and anything else required for daily survival. Water used for cleaning has itself often been carried from sources you would consider contaminated. The constant battle against invisible pathogens that modern sanitation wages silently for you has no equivalent here. Yet amid this harsh reality, you'd also encounter aspects of human existence that modern life has diminished or lost entirely. Community isn't an optional add-on to individual life, but its very foundation. People know their neighbors, share resources, assist with labor, celebrate and mourn together, not out of optional kindness, but necessary interdependence. Stories aren't passive entertainment on screens, but active communal experiences, shared around fires, remembered and retold, binding generations together with common narrative threads. Silence and darkness are complete in ways you've never experienced, allowing for forms of rest and contemplation increasingly rare in your noise-filled, light-polluted modern existence. Skills that are hobbies in your world are essential survival knowledge here. Can you tell which plants are edible and which are poison? Can you build a fire without matches or lighters? Can you construct a shelter, trap an animal, preserve food without refrigeration? Can you navigate by stars, predict weather from cloud patterns, find water in unfamiliar terrain? These aren't specialized survival skills for enthusiasts. They're the basic literacy of existence that every child begins learning as soon as they can walk. The relationship with animals differs fundamentally as well. They aren't pets or distant creatures in zoos and nature documentaries. Their immediate presences, sources of food, labor, danger, or competition. You live among them, use them, fear them, defend against them. Their sounds and smells are constant companions. Their needs must be met before your comfort can be considered. They observe you as you observe them, each assessing the other's potential as predator, prey, or partner in survival. As the initial shock begins to fade, you notice something else. The overwhelming sensory input begins to organize itself into patterns. The seemingly chaotic sounds have rhythms and meanings. The indistinguishable voices become individual people with stories and connections. The landscape isn't random, but carefully shaped by generations of human intervention. Terraced hills for agriculture, paths worn by consistent use, trees and plants cultivated for specific purposes. What appeared as primitive disorder reveals itself as complex adaptation to environment and resources. This is the world of the Bible, not as a dusty text or a collection of moral lessons, but as lived human experience. A world where survival isn't guaranteed, where comfort is rare, where meaning and purpose take forms both simpler and more profound than modern equivalents. A world where the sacred and mundane aren't separated but thoroughly intertwined. A world that shaped the stories, laws, poems, and prophecies that would eventually be recorded in the text that continues to influence billions of lives millennia later. You find yourself wondering if the people who wrote these words, who lived these stories, who crafted these laws could see your world. Would they find it as incomprehensible as you find theirs? Would they marvel at your technological miracles while pitying the isolation and disconnection they enable? Would they envy your physical safety while mourning the loss of cosmic significance in your daily actions? Would they recognize their God in your air-conditioned sanctuaries? As night begins to fall on your first day in this ancient world, bringing new terrors and challenges, you realize that understanding the Bible isn't just about interpreting ancient words correctly. It's about recognizing the vast gulf between their reality and yours, a gulf that cannot be bridged by academic knowledge alone, but requires imaginative empathy and humility. The words that have been transmitted across millennia came from real human lives in settings so different from yours that simple translation of language cannot capture the full depth of their meaning. The darkness deepens. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows on mud brick walls. Outside, jackals begin their nightly calls. Inside, families gather close, sharing warmth and the day's final meal. Stories are told, prayers offered, songs sung not as cultural performances but as essential rhythms of existence. Sleep will come soon, bringing brief respite before tomorrow's labor begins again with the dawn. This is the world that gave birth to the sacred text, immediate, embodied, precarious, communal, and utterly unlike the environment in which you normally encounter it. The nightfall in the biblical world continues to wrap around you, different from any darkness you've experienced in modern life. This isn't the artificial night of city glow and device screens, it's profound, primordial darkness that swallows everything. The stars above aren't the faint pinpricks you might occasionally notice between skyscrapers. Here, they dominate the sky in overwhelming numbers, a brilliant tapestry that ancient eyes understood as cosmic messages, divine writing. For them, these weren't distant suns but immediate signs, heavenly bodies with purpose and meaning that directly influenced human affairs. Sleep itself is nothing like what you're accustomed to. Forgotten is your carefully selected mattress with its perfect balance of support and softness. Forgotten are your blackout curtains, your white noise machine, your precisely regulated room temperature. Here, you sleep when darkness makes other activities impossible, and you wake when light makes sleep difficult. Your body, not your phone alarm, determines these rhythms. Most people in biblical times practiced segmented sleep, a first sleep shortly after sunset, then an hour or two of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night, followed by a second sleep until dawn. Your uninterrupted 8 hours is a modern luxury their bodies never knew. The sleeping arrangements would shock your sense of personal space. Family members of all ages sleep in close proximity, often on shared mats in a single room. Privacy isn't a concept that would make sense to them, Bodies pressed together for warmth in winter, and in summer, some might sleep on rooftops to catch what little breeze might pass. There are no separate bedrooms for children, no nurseries for babies. The intimate sounds of human sleep, breathing, shifting, occasional snoring form a concert that modern ears, accustomed to isolation, would find impossible to ignore. The night brings dangers that we've long since engineered away. Wild animals, jackals, hyenas, occasional wolves prowl closer to human settlements under cover of darkness. Thieves move more boldly without streetlights to expose them. Fire, necessary for warmth and cooking, becomes a constant threat to structures built of flammable materials without fire departments standing by. Someone must always remain semi-alert, ready to respond to these nocturnal threats. Deep, oblivious sleep is a vulnerability few can afford. Your body would lie on a mat stuffed with dried grasses or wool if you're fortunate, or directly on hard, packed earth if you're not. The ground radiates cold that seeps into your bones during winter nights. In summer, insects find their way through the fibers of your bedding, tiny bites adding to your discomfort. Rodents scurry across floors, occasionally bold enough to investigate sleepers, looking for crumbs or warmth. Sleep isn't the sacred, protected state of modern life, but a necessary vulnerability endured rather than enjoyed. And when morning comes again, there is no gentle transition, no hitting snooze, no gradually increasing light from your smart home system. Dawn arrives with sudden brightness and immediate heat. The day's activities begin instantly. Animals need feeding. Water needs collecting before the day's heat makes labor more difficult. Food preparation cannot wait. Your body, accustomed to a gentle morning routine, would rebel against this abrupt transition from rest to full activity. The first needs of the day are immediate and physical. Your bladder, full from night, demands relief, but there are no private bathrooms with flushing toilets. Designated areas for waste exist, but privacy consists of perhaps a crude screen or simply turning away from others. The smell of human waste permeates these spaces, especially in warmer weather. No toilet paper, depending on the culture, stones, leaves, or water might be used for cleaning. Even this most basic bodily function becomes a strange, uncomfortable experience requiring adjustment of deeply ingrained habits. Morning hunger follows, but breakfast isn't a predictable meal. Many in biblical times ate only 1 or 2 meals daily, with perhaps some bread or dried fruit to begin the day if available. There's no coffee to jump-start your system, no quick bowl of cereal with refrigerated milk. Food preparation is a complex process that begins anew each day. Fires must be kindled, water fetched, grains ground. Your modern stomach, accustomed to regular feeding schedules, would protest loudly at these extended periods without food, adding hunger pangs to your growing list of physical discomforts. Food preparation is perhaps where you'd feel most disoriented. There are no refrigerators keeping ingredients fresh, no prepackaged components, no recorded recipes with precise measurements. Cooking is knowledge passed through generations, adapted to available resources, measured by experienced hands and eyes rather than cups and teaspoons. And the process is physically demanding. Grinding grain between stones requires powerful arm and shoulder muscles that modern humans rarely develop. Kneading dough without electric mixers builds hand strength that would leave you with cramping fingers and aching wrists after just a few minutes. The available ingredients would seem simultaneously limited and unfamiliar. No refined sugar. Honey is the primary sweetener, expensive and used sparingly. No chocolate, no vanilla, no citrus in many regions. Spices exist but are luxury items for most people, not everyday flavoring. Meat appears occasionally rather than at every meal, and when present, it's nothing like the carefully butchered, neatly packaged portions in supermarket displays. It's recognizably part of a specific animal, with textures and flavors that unmodified breeding and free-range feeding produce. Your palate, accustomed to engineered flavors and consistent textures, would find these intense, variable tastes overwhelming. Bread forms the foundation of most meals, but it's not the soft, uniform slices from plastic bags. It's dense, chewy flatbread, often containing bits of grit from the stone grinding process that gradually wear down teeth over years of consumption. The taste varies with the available grain, sometimes wheat, often barley, which has a distinct bitterness. Making this daily staple consumes hours of mainly female labor: harvesting, threshing, winnowing, grinding, mixing, kneading, baking. What takes you seconds to drop into your shopping cart represents someone's entire morning of physical toil. Vegetables appear seasonally, not year-round as in modern supermarkets. They're smaller than their hybridized descendants, often more bitter, and prepared simply boiled, occasionally roasted. Fruits are eaten when ripe and available, preserved when possible through drying. Nothing is wasted, even cooking water becomes part of other dishes. Meals repeat with limited variation. The concept of constantly changing menus for interest and variety would seem bizarre and wastefully extravagant. Your modern palate, spoiled by global cuisine and infinite variety, would find this repetition psychologically challenging long before physical hunger became an issue. Even the simplest modern convenience, clean, readily available water, requires constant effort here. Women and it is almost always women, make multiple trips daily to wells or springs, carrying heavy clay jars or animal skin containers. The water itself might need to settle in large vessels to allow sediment to sink before use. You wouldn't simply turn a tap for a glass of water. You'd dip a shared cup into a community vessel, drinking water that others have touched, that has been exposed to air and insects, that carries minerals and microorganisms your body has never encountered. Your sophisticated digestive system, which has never needed to develop resistance to these particular pathogens, would likely respond with dramatic illness. The weight of a full water jug on your head or hip would strain muscles unused to such specific burdens. The distance to water sources might be considerable, not steps to a kitchen sink, but potentially miles to the nearest reliable spring or well. And this journey must be made regardless of weather conditions, personal illness, or competing demands. Dehydration is a constant threat, especially during warmer months, yet water consumption must be balanced against the labor required to obtain it. No wonder that in biblical stories, wells become central meeting places. Sites of significant encounters, they represent not just water sources but community lifelines. Personal hygiene follows none of the routines you know. There are no daily showers with scented body wash, no teeth brushing with fluoride toothpaste, no deodorant to mask natural body odor. Bathing might happen weekly at most, often in shared water. Teeth cleaning, if practiced at all, involves rubbing with cloth or chewing specific woods with natural antibacterial properties. Human scent isn't masked, but accepted as the normal condition of bodies. Your modern sensitivities would be constantly offended until, if you survived long enough, your nose adapted to this more organic olfactory landscape. The concept of regular bathing as we understand it doesn't exist for most people. In many regions, water is too precious to use for full body washing except on special occasions. Instead, spot cleaning of hands, face, and feet might occur daily, with more complete bathing reserved for ritual purposes or rare opportunities. The idea that everyone should smell pleasantly neutral or artificially fragranced would seem as strange to them as their comfort with natural body odor seems to you. This isn't slovenliness, but a different standard operating from different resources and priorities. The clothing against your skin would feel nothing like the soft, precisely fitted garments you're accustomed to. No synthetic fabrics, no elastic, no fine cotton blends. Instead, rough wool that scratches with every movement, undyed linen that stains easily and permanently, leather tanned with processes that leave it stiff and aromatic. Nothing is precisely sized for individual bodies, garments are loose, fitting by necessity, often repaired repeatedly rather than replaced. The constant awareness of your clothing, its weight, texture, restriction would be yet another sensory input your modern nervous system isn't trained to filter out. Your feet, accustomed to supportive, cushioned shoes, would suffer most immediately on the rough terrain. Sandals, if worn at all, provide minimal protection from stones, thorns, and uneven ground. Many people, especially children, go barefoot despite these hazards. Calluses develop naturally as necessary armor against the environment. Your soft modern feet would blister within hours, making even basic movement painful. And in biblical terrain, immobility quickly becomes life-threatening. You must move to access water, food, shelter, regardless of physical discomfort. The physical labor required for basic survival would overwhelm your modern body. Every calorie consumed requires substantial effort to produce, prepare, and preserve. Building and maintaining shelter demands heavy lifting, repeated bending, precise coordination developed through years of practice. Collecting sufficient firewood for cooking and warmth means walking miles, carrying increasingly heavy loads. Modern exercise routines, even strenuous ones, focus isolated muscle groups for limited periods. This labor engages your entire body continuously from dawn until dusk. Without recovery days or ergonomic equipment, within days your hands would develop blisters that break and bleed, eventually forming calluses if you survive long enough. Your lower back would ache constantly from unfamiliar movements without supportive furniture. Your shoulders and neck would knot with tension from carrying loads on your head or across your upper body. Modern massage, heat packs, and anti-inflammatory medications don't exist to relieve these conditions you would simply endure, as everyone around you does. recognizing pain as the normal state of an active human body rather than a problem to be solved. And beneath these practical daily challenges lies a deeper, more profound difference: the fundamental understanding of why things happen in the world. Your modern mind seeks mechanical causation, scientific explanation, statistical probability. The biblical mind sees divine intention, spiritual influence, moral causation. Illness isn't the result of viral infection, but divine punishment or demonic influence. Good harvests aren't about optimal rainfall and farming techniques, but divine blessing on a righteous community. This isn't simply a different belief system laid over the same perception of reality. It's a fundamentally different way of experiencing and interpreting every event, from falling rain to human conflict. This worldview permeates every aspect of daily life. Modern secular spaces like banks, government offices, or shopping centers have no equivalent. All aspects of community life are integrated with religious significance. Economic transactions include religious elements. Political decisions are inseparable from divine mandates. Social relationships carry spiritual significance. There's no religion as a separate category of life. The sacred permeates everything, invisible but essential as air, structuring every interaction and decision. Even your understanding of time would need complete reconstruction. You measure minutes precisely, schedule appointments at exact hours, plan weeks and months in advance with reasonable confidence that the future will unfold as expected. The biblical world moves by rhythms, both more immediate and more cosmic: the position of the sun, the phase of the moon, the agricultural cycle, the religious calendar. Days aren't divided into hours for most practical purposes. Years may be counted differently depending on which kingdom or empire currently holds power. Long-term planning beyond the next harvest tempts fate. Tomorrow is in God's hands, not yours to anticipate with confidence. Material possessions take on entirely different significance. In your world, objects are easily replaceable, often disposable, distinguished more by brand identity than intrinsic value. Here, each object represents significant investment of limited resources and labor. A clay pot isn't one of dozens of interchangeable vessels, but a specific item made by known hands, repaired rather than replaced when damaged, used for generations. Clothing isn't fashion, but protection and identity, worn until it literally falls apart, then transformed into other useful items. This isn't environmentalism as ethical choice, but necessary stewardship of irreplaceable resources. The very concept of waste differs fundamentally. Your world produces mountains of discarded packaging, planned obsolescence. Styled goods replaced long before their functionality fails. The biblical world uses every part of slaughtered animals, repurposes every scrap of fabric, saves ashes from fires to make soap, collects human and animal waste for fertilizer. Not from environmental consciousness, but from the lived reality that resources are finite and precious. That survival requires maximum utility from minimum materials. What can't be used for humans becomes animal feed. What animals won't eat becomes fuel. What won't burn enriches soil. As you move through a typical day, dangers accumulate around you, hazards that modern safety systems have eliminated so effectively that you've forgotten they ever existed. Fire, necessary for cooking and warmth, poses constant threat to homes built of flammable materials, with open flames maintained throughout the day. Burns are common, especially among women working near cooking fires and children playing nearby. More catastrophically, entire communities can be destroyed when wind-blown sparks ignite thatched roofs or stored grain. There are no fire departments, no insurance policies, just neighbors forming bucket brigades, often too late to save anything but lives. Water, essential for survival, brings its own dangers. Wells and cisterns, especially those with crumbling stones or eroded edges, claim lives through accidental falls. Rivers provide water, but also drowning hazards, particularly during flash floods that transform gentle streams into raging torrents within minutes. The act of carrying water, heavy jars balanced on heads or slung across shoulders, leads to repetitive stress injuries, spinal compression, and accidents on uneven terrain. Even the water itself harbors microscopic threats, parasites, and bacteria that cause dysentery, typhoid, and other diseases that modern sanitation has largely eliminated. Animal threats extend beyond nighttime predators. Domesticated animals, necessary for survival, present constant danger: kicks from donkeys or oxen, goring by cattle, bites from dogs. These injuries frequently become infected in the absence of antibiotics, leading to systemic illness or death. Venomous creatures: snakes, scorpions, certain spiders make their homes in the same fields where humans must work, in the same stone walls that form human dwellings. Their bites, easily treated in modern emergency rooms, can be fatal here, especially for children or the elderly whose bodies have less reserve to combat the toxins. Human threats may be the most dangerous of all. Ancient societal structures lack modern law enforcement, regulated judiciary systems, or established human rights. Justice often depends on family connections, social status, or simple physical power. Violence erupts with minimal provocation, disputes over water rights, perceived insults to honor, territorial encroachment. Without modern weapons, this violence might seem less lethal, but clubs, stones, and farming implements become deadly weapons in human hands. And suffering may be prolonged: head injuries, internal bleeding, and infected wounds kill slowly without modern intervention, stretching pain across days or weeks instead of ending it mercifully in death or recovery. Weather, which you experience from the protection of insulated buildings and weather-appropriate clothing, presents immediate survival challenges here. Summer heat isn't counteracted by air conditioning but endured, sometimes fatally for the very young, the elderly, or those already weakened by illness or injury. Winter cold penetrates inadequate shelter, stealing body heat from those without sufficient calories to maintain internal temperature. Rain transforms paths to dangerous mudslides, damaging homes with leaking roofs, ruining stored food supplies with catastrophic consequences for winter survival. These aren't inconveniences but potentially life-ending events. Disease moves differently through this world. Without understanding of germ theory, contagion spreads unchecked within crowded households and communities. Simple respiratory infections become pneumonia without antibiotics, often fatal particularly at the age extremes. Intestinal illnesses from contaminated food or water cause dehydration that can kill within days, especially in children. Minor cuts become systemic infections. Childbirth, a medical event with minimal risk in modern hospitals, becomes potentially deadly through hemorrhage, infection, or obstructed labor. Your body, never exposed to these specific pathogens and never developed immunity, would be especially vulnerable in this microbial landscape. The psychological dangers are equally foreign to modern experience. There is no concept of mental health as distinct from spiritual condition or moral character. What modern medicine might diagnose as depression, anxiety disorder, or post-traumatic stress would be interpreted as divine punishment, demonic influence, or character weakness. There are no therapists, no antidepressants, no recognized treatments beyond prayer, ritual, and community support, which sometimes helps and sometimes deepens suffering through blame or ostracism. Psychological pain, like physical pain, isn't a problem to be solved but a condition to be endured as part of the human experience. With nightfall approaching again, new dangers emerge. The biblical night isn't just dark, it's a separate realm of existence with its own rules and threats. Evil is believed to move more freely after sunset, both supernatural evil in the form of demons and spirits, and human evil in the form of those who prefer darkness for their activities. Sleep makes you vulnerable, yet sleep deprivation quickly impairs function and judgment. This creates a precarious balance: deep enough rest to sustain life, alert enough awareness to respond to threats. Your modern brain, accustomed to complete security during sleep, would struggle to maintain this protective semi-consciousness that was normal for centuries of human experience. As another night envelops the biblical landscape, the threats that began with sunset continue to multiply. Darkness in this world isn't just the absence of light, it's a state with its own spiritual significance. In many ancient belief systems, night represents divine withdrawal, a time when malevolent forces gain temporary advantage. This isn't superstition to the people around you, but lived reality. The sounds of night, distant animal calls, rustling vegetation, unfamiliar creaks and movements carry potential warnings that your untrained ears would miss completely. Here, listening could mean survival. The night sky itself tells stories you can't read. Modern light pollution has hidden most stars from daily experience, but here they dominate the darkness in overwhelming numbers. For biblical people, celestial patterns weren't just beautiful, they were meaningful communications, divine signposts, navigational aids. They tracked planetary movements with naked eye precision that modern astronomers find remarkable. The ability to read these heavenly signs isn't mystical knowledge, but practical survival skill, as essential as checking weather apps is to your daily planning. Your celestial illiteracy would be yet another vulnerability, marking you as dangerously unprepared for this world. Sleep itself is dangerous, a temporary surrender of consciousness in a world full of threats. Biblical era homes offer minimal security by modern standards. Doors might be simple wooden barriers, perhaps reinforced with cross beams, but still vulnerable to determined intrusion. Windows are openings, sometimes covered with lattice but rarely sealed. Animals can enter: snakes seeking warmth, scorpions pursuing prey, rodents looking for food. More dangerous are human intruders, thieves who take advantage of darkness, sometimes willing to commit violence if discovered. The biblical commandment against stealing exists precisely because property theft was common enough to require divine prohibition. Yet night has another side that modern experience has largely lost. Without artificial lighting extending activity past sunset, nights create natural boundaries for work and social engagement. This forced rhythm, following patterns set by sunlight rather than social obligation or digital distraction, allows for forms of rest increasingly rare in artificially illuminated modern life. Conversations around cooking fires, storytelling traditions that flourish in darkness, singing and music making, these communal night activities strengthen bonds, essential for collective survival. Your modern habit of isolated evening entertainment would separate you from these crucial community connections. The simple act of relieving yourself during night presents hazards you've never considered. There are no indoor bathrooms with night lights guiding your way. Venturing outside, or even to a designated corner of your dwelling, means navigating complete darkness, risking injury from unseen obstacles or encounters with nocturnal creatures. Many simply used pottery vessels kept nearby, adding their contents to compost or fertilizer piles in the morning. The privacy and hygiene you consider basic human dignities are luxuries unavailable to even the wealthiest biblical figures. Kings and commoners alike experience bodily functions without modern sanitation's shield of invisibility. Morning arrives with both relief and new dangers. The transition from darkness to light isn't the gentle brightening of modern bedrooms, but sudden illumination that provides no adjustment period. Eyes accustomed to darkness are temporarily blinded by dawn's brightness, a vulnerability when immediate action might be required. Night hunting predators may still be active, making one last attempt at prey before retreating to daytime hiding places. Morning also reveals what darkness concealed, perhaps damage to structures, signs of unwelcome visitors, evidence of theft or predation that must be addressed immediately regardless of fatigue or hunger. The dangers of daylight differ from nocturnal threats, but are no less deadly. Sunlight that modern humans experience primarily as pleasant warmth or inconvenient glare was a serious health hazard before modern protection. Without sunglasses, sunscreen, or adequate head covering, solar radiation damages eyes and skin with cumulative effect. Heat stroke claimed lives regularly during summer months, particularly among those required to work in direct sunlight, agricultural laborers, construction workers, travelers between settlements. Your body, never trained to tolerate prolonged heat exposure, that would succumb quickly to temperatures others have adapted to over lifetimes. Physical injury represents another constant threat. Modern work environments have safety regulations, ergonomic equipment, protective gear. Biblical labor uses primitive tools with minimal safeguards, axes without safety features, knives lacking proper handles, farming implements designed for effectiveness rather than user protection, falls from heights during construction or harvesting, burns from cooking fires, muscle tears from lifting excessive weights. These injuries occur daily, often with minimal treatment options beyond rest aside if circumstances allow, and herbal poultices of varying effectiveness. Your modern body, never trained for these specific movements and lacking the muscle memory of lifelong practice, would be especially vulnerable to damaging missteps. Water sources, essential for survival, harbor their own dangers. Wells with deteriorating stone walls collapse without warning, burying those unlucky enough to be drawing water at the wrong moment. Rivers that provide life, sustaining irrigation, also flood, destroying homes and drowning the unwary. Even the act of collecting water creates risk. Heavy jars carried on heads or shoulders lead to spinal compression, repetitive strain injuries, accidents when paths are muddy or uneven. More invisible but equally threatening are waterborne pathogens, bacteria, and parasites unknown to modern water treatment systems. Your gut, never exposed to these specific microorganisms, would have no defense against their invasive colonization. Food preparation, a relatively safe activity in modern kitchens, ranks among the most dangerous daily tasks in biblical life. Open flames for cooking cause burns and occasionally spread to flammable surroundings. Smoke inhalation from inadequate ventilation creates respiratory issues that accumulate over years. Knives and other cutting implements, crafted for function without safety features, slip and slice fingers with regular frequency. Food itself can harbor naturally occurring toxins, parasites, or bacteria that proper cooking sometimes but not always neutralizes. Without refrigeration, food spoilage occurs rapidly, especially in warmer months. The line between fermentation, beneficial, and putrefaction, dangerous, requires experienced judgment developed over years of observation. These physical dangers pale compared to the social threats that would confront you as an outsider. Biblical communities function as interwoven networks of obligation, reputation, and mutual support developed over generations. Your sudden appearance without family connections, without known history, without established place in the social hierarchy would trigger immediate suspicion. In a world where resources barely suffice even in good years, unknown persons represent potential competition for necessities rather than interesting novel additions to community life. Without known sponsors to vouch for your character and capability, your reception would range from cautious tolerance to outright hostility. Language itself presents an insurmountable initial barrier. Even if you've studied Biblical Hebrew, Aramaic, or Koine Greek academically, the actual spoken dialects would differ substantially from reconstructed pronunciation, regional accents, colloquialisms, and specialized vocabulary for daily activities would render scholarly knowledge almost useless for practical communication. Your strange speech patterns would immediately identify you as foreign, a dangerous identity in regions where outside influences often arrived in the form of taxation, military conscription, or cultural suppression. Your inability to participate in religious recitations or respond to common greetings would further isolate you from community protective structures. Beyond language, nonverbal communication follows rules you've never learned. The appropriate physical distance between people of different genders, ages, and social positions varies significantly from modern Western norms. Eye contact that seems respectful and attentive to you might appear challenging or inappropriately intimate in biblical contexts. Hand gestures you use unconsciously could carry offensive or blasphemous meanings here. Even your posture and gait, shaped by modern furniture, footwear, and movement patterns, would mark you as different in ways you couldn't control, but others would instantly recognize. These subtle signals of foreignness would trigger warning responses before you spoke a single word. The social structure itself operates on principles your modern individualism has never had to navigate. Your worth isn't determined by personal achievement, educational credentials, or economic success, but by your place within family and community networks. Honor and shame aren't private emotional states, but public currencies that determine access to resources, marriage prospects, business opportunities, and physical protection. Behavior that affects group reputation can have severe consequences, even when it harms no one directly. Your modern sense of personal autonomy, the belief that individual choices primarily impact the individual, has no foundation in biblical social reality, where all actions reflect on collective identity. Religious practices aren't optional personal expressions, but mandatory community commitments. Failure to participate correctly doesn't just impact your spiritual status, but threatens group welfare by potentially angering divine powers. Dietary restrictions, prayer times, purity regulations, these aren't matters of personal conviction, but essential boundaries maintaining community identity and divine protection. Your ignorance of proper rituals wouldn't be excused as cultural difference, but condemned as dangerous negligence endangering everyone. Even if you manage to observe the visible practices correctly, your underlying theology and worldview, shaped by modern assumptions about causality and natural law, would eventually reveal themselves as dangerously foreign. The gender-based division of labor and social space would present immediate practical challenges. If you appear male, women's spaces where essential knowledge about food preparation, textile production, and child rearing resides would be inaccessible to you. If you appear female, male domains of certain trades, political discussions, and public religious leadership would exclude you completely. Your modern expectation of moving freely between gendered spaces would violate fundamental social boundaries. Attempting to cross these invisible but rigid lines wouldn't be seen as progressive, but as threatening to essential social order. Age hierarchies create another layer of complexity. In biblical societies, elders command automatic respect based on their survival to advanced years, proof of divine favor and accumulated wisdom. Youth defers to age in ways modern Western culture has largely abandoned. As an outsider without established place in the generational hierarchy, you would struggle to determine appropriate behavior toward different age groups. Should you speak first or wait to be addressed? Should you remain standing until invited to sit? Should you offer opinions or maintain silence? Missteps in these age-based protocols wouldn't be dismissed as cultural confusion, but interpreted as deliberate disrespect, warranting community correction. The concept of time itself structures social interactions differently. Modern precision meeting at exactly 300 Allowing 45 minutes for an activity, planning weeks or months ahead has no meaning here. Time flows according to natural rhythms and immediate needs rather than arbitrary increments. Social gatherings begin when sufficient people arrive and end when activities conclude, not according to predetermined schedules. Religious observances follow lunar cycles and agricultural seasons rather than standardized calendars. Your time consciousness checking for imaginary watches, expressing impatience with delays that locals don't perceive as problematic. Attempting to schedule future activities with precision would mark you as operating under foreign and possibly threatening principles. Even emotional expression follows unfamiliar rules. Certain feelings must be displayed publicly and dramatically. Grief requires visible wailing and physical demonstrations like tearing clothes. Joy demands energetic celebration with music and dance. Other emotions must be carefully controlled according to gender and status. Anger may be permitted for men in authority, but dangerous for those in subordinate positions. Fear might be acceptable for women but shameful for men. Your modern emotional restraint in some contexts and expressiveness in others would appear inappropriate or even offensive. The biblical emotional landscape isn't just different in display, but in fundamental understanding of what feelings mean and how they should function within community. The social dimension of eating would confuse your modern sensibilities. Meals aren't just nutritional necessity, but complex expressions of status, relationship, and religious identity. Seating arrangements, who eats first, who serves whom. What foods are offered to different guests. These aren't casual choices, but meaningful communications governed by strict protocols. Refusing offered food can constitute severe insult. Accepting the wrong food from the wrong person can imply inappropriate relationship. Every bite carries social significance beyond simple sustenance. Your unconscious modern eating habits, preferences based on personal taste rather than status, assumptions about individual portions, expectations of choice would violate mealtime protocols in ways both obvious and subtle. Clothing serves as immediate visual communication of identity rather than personal expression. Every element, material, color, decoration, style indicates specific information about gender, age, marital status, tribe, wealth, and occupation. Without understanding these visual signals, you would misread everyone around you while simultaneously misstating your own identity through inappropriate dress. Modern concepts of fashion, personal style, and situational dressing have no place here. Clothing isn't self-expression, but accurate representation of established social position. Your inability to present yourself correctly through appropriate attire would hinder all social interactions before they began. Trade and commerce follow relationship patterns entirely unlike anonymous modern transactions. There are no price tags, no standardized weights and measures, no consumer protection regulations. Every exchange involves negotiation not just of value but of social connection. Purchasing daily necessities requires established relationships with vendors rather than simple currency exchange. Prices vary based on personal connection, perceived need, time of day, and negotiation skill. Your modern expectation of fixed pricing and impersonal commerce would leave you vulnerable to exploitation if anyone were willing to trade with an unknown person at all. Without established community connections, obtaining even basic necessities would become nearly impossible. Family structure forms the foundation of all social organization, but biblical family bears little resemblance to modern nuclear units. Extended households include multiple generations, unmarried relatives, servants or slaves, and even unrelated individuals under protection of the family head. Every person has defined responsibilities and privileges according to their position within this complex structure. Authority follows clear hierarchical patterns. with the senior male exercising control over all household members, including adult children with their own families. Your individualistic understanding of family as voluntary association of equals would find no corresponding reality in biblical household organization. Marriage arrangements would particularly shock modern sensibilities. Unions are contracted between families rather than individuals, with economic and social alliance at least as important as interpersonal compatibility. Age at first marriage differs dramatically from modern patterns. Women often marry in early teens, men when they can demonstrate ability to provide material support. Romantic attraction plays minimal role in initial arrangements, though it might develop after marriage. Polygyny as in multiple wives appears in many biblical narratives, not as moral failing but as normal practice for men with sufficient resources. Your modern expectations of marriage as equal partnership, based on mutual romantic choice, would find no cultural framework here. Children occupy fundamentally different position in biblical society. They are economic assets rather than financial liabilities, expected to contribute labor from early ages rather than focusing on education and self-development. Childhood as protected period of play and discovery barely exists by age 6 or 7. Most children engage in productive work appropriate to their physical capabilities. Discipline methods include physical correction considered abuse by modern standards. High child mortality rates affect emotional attachment patterns. Names might not be given until survival seems likely. Intense grief might be culturally discouraged as resistance to divine will. Your modern child-centered family structure and parenting ideals would appear impractical and potentially harmful in context of subsistence living. Religious life permeates every aspect of daily existence in ways modern compartmentalized spirituality cannot approximate. No distinction exists between secular and sacred spaces. Divine presence suffuses all locations, though with varying degrees of intensity requiring different behaviors. Time itself divides into sacred and ordinary periods requiring specific observances. Food, clothing, physical conditions including menstruation and emissions all carry spiritual significance requiring ritual response. Every significant life transition, birth, coming of age, marriage, death incorporates religious ceremony essential to proper completion. Even ordinary activities like planting crops, starting journeys, or building structures include spiritual dimensions through prayers, offerings, or ritual acts. The practical implementation of biblical religion differs dramatically from modern worship. Animal sacrifice, the ritualized slaughter of livestock with precise procedures for blood handling and carcass disposition, forms the center of many significant religious observances. The sights, sounds, and smells of temple sacrifice would shock modern sensibilities: bleating animals, flowing blood, burning flesh, smoke rising from altars. Purity regulations govern who may approach sacred spaces, with menstruating women, those with skin conditions, and anyone contacting dead bodies temporarily excluded from full religious participation. The concept of religious services as primarily verbal and cerebral sermons, theological discussions. Text study would seem inadequate to biblical participants accustomed to physical, sensory religious expression. Festivals structure the annual calendar with required observances that modern optional holiday celebrations only faintly resemble. Pilgrimages to central worship locations require long, potentially dangerous travel several times yearly. Extended periods of dietary restriction, not just selective fasting, but complete abstention from leavened bread during Passover week, for example, necessitate careful planning and preparation. Specific harvests cannot begin until religious ceremonies acknowledge divine provision. These aren't scheduling preferences, but divine commands carrying serious consequences for non-compliance. Your modern approach to religious holidays as primarily cultural observances or opportunities for family gathering would miss the cosmic significance attached to proper festival observance. Divine communication occurs through channels modern spirituality rarely acknowledges. Dreams require interpretation as potential messages from spiritual realms. Natural events, unusual weather patterns, celestial phenomena, unexpected animal behavior may indicate divine approval, warning, or judgment. Prophetic figures receive direct divine communication with authority to pronounce blessing or cursing over individuals and communities. Illness, injury, or misfortune suggests possible divine discipline requiring examination of community and personal righteousness. These aren't superstitious interpretations, but structured theological frameworks for understanding how divine will manifest in human experience. Your modern tendency to seek natural explanations for physical phenomena would appear not as scientific thinking, but as dangerous spiritual blindness. The religious dimensions of biblical life continue to manifest in physical challenges unknown to modern experience. Fasting, deliberate abstention from food and sometimes water, occurs regularly as both communal observance and personal spiritual practice. This isn't the casual skipping of meals that modern people might occasionally attempt for health or convenience. Biblical fasting involves complete food deprivation for periods ranging from sunrise to sunset to multiple days, sometimes extending beyond a week for particularly intensive spiritual encounters. Your body, accustomed to regular caloric intake and constant hydration, would struggle severely with these practices that local bodies have adapted to through lifelong repetition. The physical demands of proper worship would surprise modern religious practitioners. Prayer isn't just mental or verbal, but intensely physical prostration, lying face down, kneeling for extended periods, standing with raised arms until muscles tremble with exhaustion. Religious processions involve walking miles, often in difficult terrain or harsh weather. Dancing as worship requires sustained physical exertion that modern bodies rarely experience. Sacred texts must be memorized through repetitive recitation rather than casual reading. These embodied religious practices reflect understanding that the divine is encountered through physical discipline as much as intellectual assent or emotional experience. Your spiritual life, if it exists at all, has likely never required this level of bodily commitment. Ritual purity regulations create another layer of physical challenge. Menstruating women must separate from regular social spaces, sometimes dwelling in dedicated structures during their monthly cycles. Men experiencing emissions must undergo specific washing procedures before rejoining community activities. Contact with dead bodies, unavoidable in a world where family members prepare their deceased for burial, requires elaborate purification processes before normal life can resume. Childbirth initiates extended periods of ritual impurity requiring specific remedial actions. These aren't simply symbolic observations but physical realities affecting movement, social interaction, and daily responsibilities. Your modern body, never trained to track and respond to these conditions, would constantly violate purity boundaries without even recognizing the transgressions. The concept of clean and unclean extends beyond bodily states to environmental factors. Certain animals are prohibited not just from consumption but sometimes from contact. Molds and mildews in dwellings require specific remediation procedures before spaces can be re-inhabited. Particular combinations of materials, wool mixed with linen in a single garment, for example, violate divine ordering of creation and must be avoided. These prohibitions aren't arbitrary rules, but essential maintenance of cosmic boundaries between ordered creation and chaotic forces. Your modern materialistic worldview would struggle to comprehend the genuine spiritual danger these physical violations represent to biblical understanding. Seasonal challenges create cyclical physical hardships that modern climate control has largely eliminated. Summer heat in the Near East isn't minor discomfort, but potentially lethal threat, particularly during Hamsin or Kamsin wind events that bring scorching temperatures and dust storms lasting days. Without air conditioning, swimming pools, or even reliable ice, bodies must endure ambient temperatures regularly exceeding 100 degrees Fs at 38 degrees C. Winter brings different challenges. Homes lacking central heating struggle to maintain survivable internal temperatures. Rain transforms dirt roads to muddy obstacles, sometimes making travel between settlements impossible for days or weeks. Seasonal food scarcity creates periods of limited nutrition when stores from previous harvests dwindle before new crops mature. Your body, accustomed to environmental consistency regardless of season, would find these cyclical extremes increasingly debilitating. Agricultural labor, the foundation of biblical economy, demands physical capabilities few modern bodies develop. Not the mechanized farming of modern agriculture, but hand cultivation requiring deep core strength, robust cardiovascular capacity, and specific muscle development. Plowing with animal-drawn implements means hours walking behind oxen on uneven ground. Planting involves continuous bending and straightening. Harvesting grain with hand sickles requires sustained, awkward postures that modern ergonomics would condemn immediately. Threshing, separating grain from stalks, combines physical strength with precise rhythmic movement. Winnowing, separating grain from chaff, requires lifting heavy basketfuls against the wind repeatedly. Your body, even if relatively fit by modern standards, lacks both the specific strength patterns and the collused protection developed through years of these repetitive motions. Construction methods present different physical demands. Without power tools, cranes, or prefabricated materials, every structure requires immense human energy investment. Stone must be quarried with hand tools, transported without engines, fitted without precision machinery. Timber must be felled with axes, shaped with adzes and planes, positioned without hydraulic lifts. Clay for bricks must be dug, mixed with straw, formed in molds, dried in sun, all through manual labor under difficult conditions. The physics hasn't changed, the same weight must be moved, the same forces overcome, but without mechanical advantage. Human bodies absorb the entire energetic cost. Your modern muscles, even if gym-trained, lack the specific adaptations and movement patterns this labor requires. Textile production, creating the fabric for clothing, bedding, tents, and containers, involves physical processes entirely foreign to modern experience. Wool requires shearing, washing, carding, spinning, and weaving, each step demanding specific skills and physical capabilities. Flax must be harvested, retted, partially rotted in controlled conditions, dried, beaten to separate fibers, hackled, combed, spun, and woven. The simple act of spinning thread, without modern machinery, requires precise small motor control developed through years of practice. Weaving on primitive looms demands core strength, shoulder endurance, and focused attention for hours at a stretch. The cloth covering your biblical body represents thousands of hours of intensive human labor, transformed through skilled hands from raw plant or animal fiber to functional material. Food preservation without refrigeration or modern canning technology requires physically demanding processes with perfect timing. Grain must be thoroughly dried before storage, then protected from moisture and pests through constant vigilance. Fruits undergo labor, intensive drying in precisely the right conditions to prevent mold while retaining nutritional value. Vegetables might be preserved through fermentation, requiring careful preparation and monitoring. Meat and fish must be quickly salted, dried, or smoked, all processes demanding immediate attention when animals are slaughtered or catches landed. These preservation methods require not just technical knowledge, but physical stamina, to complete essential steps within critical time windows regardless of other demands, weather conditions, or personal comfort. Your modern expectation of food waiting safely until you're ready to deal with it would prove fatally flawed in this environment where timing equals survival. The physical toll of childbearing and early parenting exceeds anything in modern experience. Women conceive repeatedly throughout their fertile years, with pregnancies often spaced just far enough apart for infants to reach minimal self-sufficiency. These frequent pregnancies occur without modern prenatal care, nutritional supplements, or pain management. Birth itself happens without medical intervention, anesthesia, or hygienic conditions, attended by experienced women rather than obstetric specialists. The maternal mortality rate would horrify modern sensibilities. Death during childbirth is common enough that pregnant women commonly put their affairs in order and make farewells as precaution. Surviving mothers recover without postpartum medical supervision, often resuming physical labor within days of delivery due to economic necessity. Your modern understanding of pregnancy as carefully planned, medically managed experience bears no resemblance to this biological reality that shapes every woman's physical existence. Infant care adds another layer of physical demand. Without disposable diapers, formula, breast pumps, or childcare options, mothers remain in constant physical contact with infants for years rather than hours. Breastfeeding continues far longer than modern practice, often until children reach 2 to 4 years of age, creating substantial nutritional drain on maternal bodies already compromised by frequent pregnancies and limited dietary options. Baby carriers aren't ergonomically designed, but simple cloths binding infants to maternal bodies already engaged in necessary labor. This constant physical connection between mother and child isn't lifestyle choice, but survival necessity, creating physical interdependence modern parenting rarely approaches. Your modern conception of parenting as primarily emotional and intellectual guidance fails to capture this embodied reality of constant physical entanglement. Beyond these universal physical challenges lie specific hardships based on social position. Slaves, a substantial population in many biblical contexts, endure physical conditions that assault modern ethical sensibilities. Their bodies belong legally to others, subject to physical punishment, sexual use, experimental medical treatments, and labor demands beyond physiological sustainability. Even their reproductive capacity is owned, with children automatically inheriting slave status regardless of paternity. Physical markings or mutilations might permanently identify their status, ear piercing for voluntary lifetime servants, branding or tattooing for purchased slaves. These aren't rare abuses, but legally sanctioned treatment of humans classified as property rather than persons. Your modern assumption of bodily autonomy as fundamental human right finds no legal support in social systems where some bodies explicitly belong to others. Military service presents specialized physical challenges, particularly foreign to modern civilians. Without professional standing armies, ordinary men must transform temporarily into soldiers during conflicts, often with minimal training and inadequate equipment. Combat isn't conducted from safe distances, but through direct physical confrontation with handheld weapons requiring specific strength and skill development. Wounds receive basic field treatment without antibiotics, pain management, or surgical precision. Captured combatants face not Purdue protections but potential slavery mutilation or execution depending on captors' assessment of their potential value or threat. Even successful warriors return to communities physically altered by injuries that modern medicine would repair, but ancient healing leaves permanently marked. Your body, never conditioned for these specific physical demands, would prove dangerously inadequate if conflict erupted. Travel between settlements necessary for trade, religious pilgrimage, family connections, or political requirements creates physical hardships that modern transportation has eliminated. Journeys occur primarily on foot, with animals carrying goods rather than people except in rare circumstances. Roads, where they exist at all, lack modern engineering, no drainage systems, consistent grading, or weather protection. Safe water sources between destinations must be precisely known and carefully utilized. Overnight accommodation means sleeping outdoors or imposing on strangers, with all the vulnerability either choice entails. Bandits target travelers as easy prey, requiring constant vigilance and defensive preparation. Weather conditions that modern travelers might wait out cannot be avoided when travel schedules align with essential economic or religious timing. Your body, accustomed to passive transportation in climate-controlled vehicles over engineered roads, it would struggle with the constant physical demands and threat assessment long-distance biblical travel requires. Within this physically demanding reality, relationships with biblical figures take shapes modern sensibilities struggle to comprehend. Your conception of friendship, likely based on shared interests, emotional connection, and mutual enjoyment, bears little resemblance to biblical friendship models grounded in practical alliance, kinship obligation, and survival partnership. Biblical friendships create binding mutual commitments, the modern casual distinction between close friends and acquaintances has no cultural equivalent. Relationships come with clear reciprocal responsibilities including material support, physical protection, and reputation management. These aren't optional expressions of affection, but essential social contracts with consequences for violation. Your modern approach to friendship as emotional connection without binding obligation would appear childish at best, dangerously unreliable at worst. Relationships between genders follow rules modern Western culture has largely abandoned. Unrelated men and women rarely interact without specific purpose and proper supervision. Casual mixed gender socializing doesn't exist outside family structures. Conversations between unrelated men and women take place in public, focused on necessary business rather than personal connection. Physical touch between genders, even handshakes or brief contact, occurs only within strict parameters of kinship or certified relationships like marriage. These boundaries aren't prudish limitations, but essential social guardrails maintaining clear sexual propriety, family honor, and legitimate paternity. Your modern comfort with casual cross-gender interaction would immediately violate fundamental social boundaries, potentially triggering severe consequences for perceived sexual impropriety regardless of actual intent. Parent-child relationships differ fundamentally from modern models. Children are economic assets and social security rather than emotional projects or lifestyle choices. Parental authority isn't balanced with concern for psychological development or personal autonomy, but exercised as absolute right over children who represent literal parental property. Physical discipline, explicitly encouraged in biblical wisdom literature, forms core parenting methodology rather than last resort. Educational priorities focus on practical skills, religious knowledge, and social role fulfillment rather than self-discovery, creative expression, or career preparation. Children exist primarily as family extensions rather than individuals with unique developmental trajectories. Your modern child-centered parenting philosophies, prioritizing emotional nurturing and personal choice, would appear dangerously indulgent, potentially threatening children's practical survival by inadequately preparing them for harsh realities. Marriage functions as economic and social alliance between families rather than romantic partnership between individuals. Compatibility considerations focus on practical factors, fertility potential, work capacity, family connections rather than emotional or intellectual affinity. Gender roles within marriage are strictly defined and deeply asymmetrical by modern standards. Husbands exercise authority over wives in legal, financial, religious, and personal domains. Wives manage domestic affairs under male oversight, with primary value measured through reproductive capacity and household management rather than personal qualities. Sexual activity occurs as male right rather than mutual exchange, with female pleasure rarely considered relevant. These arrangements aren't considered oppressive, but proper ordering of divinely established gender differences. Your modern expectation of marriage as equal partnership based on romantic love would find no supporting social framework. Relationship with the divine permeates all other connections in ways modern secular mindsets struggle to comprehend. God or gods aren't abstract concepts or personal belief choices, but immediate presences affecting every aspect of existence. Divine favor or displeasure manifests through tangible realities, weather patterns, harvest yields, health conditions, military outcomes, childbearing capacity. Religious observance isn't optional spiritual expression, but necessary maintenance of divine relationship upon which all prosperity depends. Supernatural beings, angels, demons, spirits interact with physical reality in ways requiring practical response rather than theological debate. Your modern compartmentalized approach to religion as private belief systems separate from practical decision making would appear not just misguided, but actively dangerous to community welfare dependent on proper divine relationship. Leadership relationships reflect hierarchical structures completely unlike modern democratic models. Authority derives from divine appointment, birth position, or recognized spiritual capacity rather than popular selection or demonstrated competence. Leaders exercise power as right rather than responsibility, with minimal accountability to those they govern. Questioning leadership decisions constitutes not healthy civic engagement but dangerous rebellion against divinely established order. Position comes with material privileges that modern anti-corruption standards would condemn, but biblical cultures accept as proper honor due to status. These aren't flawed implementations of egalitarian ideals, but consistent expressions of worldview in which hierarchy reflects cosmic order. Your modern expectations of leadership accountability, transparent decision-making, and servant leadership philosophy would find minimal cultural traction. Educational relationships operate through apprenticeship models rather than institutional instruction. Knowledge transfers through direct observation and supervised practice rather than abstract explanation or independent study. Learning occurs within strictly practical contexts, agriculture, craftsmanship, household management with immediate application rather than theoretical foundation. Religious education emphasizes memorization and precise ritual performance rather than interpretive flexibility or personal meaning making. Access to advanced knowledge depends on gender, social position, and family connections rather than demonstrated ability or personal interest. Educational goals focus on maintaining traditional practices rather than innovation or improvement. Your modern assumptions about education as individual right, personal development tool, and innovation drive a conflict fundamentally with biblical approaches to knowledge as community resource, practical necessity, and traditional preservation. Relationships within community follow complex patterns of mutual obligation modern individualism rarely acknowledges. Community members maintain intricate awareness of relational debts and credits, who owes assistance to whom, whose reputation requires defense, which families maintain alliance through generations. These aren't optional social connections, but essential survival networks distributing resources, protection, and support through structured reciprocity. Community opinion functions not as ignorable background noise, but powerful determinant of individual welfare. Ostracism, being excluded from community exchange networks, often equates to death sentence in subsistence economies lacking social safety nets. These communal bonds aren't warm emotional extras after basic survival needs are met, but the practical system through which those needs become meetable at all. Your modern ability to survive without knowing your neighbors' names represents wealth unimaginable in biblical contexts, where community relationship literally equals life. Medical relationships reflect completely different understanding of health and healing. Illness results from spiritual causes, divine punishment, demonic influence, improper ritual observance, rather than biological processes. Healers address these spiritual roots through religious practices, herbal applications based on traditional knowledge, and ritual purification rather than evidence-based treatments. Doctor-patient relationships don't exist as modern medicine conceptualizes them. Instead, family members, religious specialists, and community elders collaborate to address afflictions whose origins and remedies cross physical, spiritual boundaries modern medicine artificially separates. These approaches aren't primitive approximations of real medicine, but coherent systems operating from different foundational understanding of bodily experience. Your modern expectation of scientifically validated, physiologically targeted treatments would find no conceptual framework in healing traditions addressing fundamentally different understanding of what bodies are and how they function. Relationship to time itself follows patterns your modern temporal experience cannot readily comprehend. Time isn't abstract measurement divorced from natural cycles but direct expression of cosmic rhythms. Days begin at sunset rather than midnight or morning, creating different psychological relationship to darkness and light. Months follow lunar cycles observable in night sky rather than standardized calendars. Years track agricultural seasons rather than arbitrary numbering systems. Age counts by harvest cycles experienced rather than abstract birth date anniversaries. Future planning extends to next season rather than 5-year goals. Past events locate relative to natural or political markers, the year of the Great Drought, or during the reign of Herod, rather than numerical dating. These aren't quaint alternatives to real time, but fundamentally different ways of experiencing temporal reality. Your modern precise scheduling, long-range planning, and abstract temporal reference points would appear not just foreign, but possibly arrogant in cultures where time belongs to divine providence rather than human management. As you continue immersing yourself in the biblical world, specific pivotal events gain new dimensions through lived physical reality rather than literary distance. Consider the Great Flood narrative not as allegory or ancient myth, but as catastrophic environmental collapse. Modern disaster experiences, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes occur within frameworks of emergency response, government assistance, and technological warning systems. The biblical flood unfolds without satellite tracking, evacuation orders, or rescue operations. Rain begins and simply doesn't stop. Waters rise without meteorological explanation. No emergency shelters open their doors. No disaster relief arrives when waters recede. The psychological impact of watching entire landscapes disappear beneath rising waters without scientific understanding of atmospheric conditions would create trauma responses entirely different from modern disaster experiences. The construction of Noah's Ark transforms from simple Bible story to overwhelming logistical challenge when viewed through ancient technological capabilities. Without power tools, pre-manufactured materials, or modern engineering knowledge, building a waterproof wooden structure of that magnitude represents nearly impossible human achievement. Every plank requires hand cutting with bronze or iron tools. Every joint demands precise fitting without modern sealants. Every measurement occurs without standardized units or precision instruments. The physical labor alone would overwhelm modern construction crews. Yet biblical narrative places this burden on essentially one family. The Ark story isn't just about divine salvation, but human capacity to respond to divine instruction through physical implementation beyond reasonable capability, a theme recurring throughout biblical narrative that modern technological assumptions often obscure. The Exodus gains visceral immediacy when experienced through physical rather than textual engagement. Desert travel without modern equipment, no lightweight moisture wicking fabrics, no insulated water containers, no GPS navigation, creates survival challenges nearly insurmountable for modern bodies accustomed to climate control and constant hydration. The psychological impact of departure from everything familiar into hostile wilderness would generate anxiety responses modern security systems and communications technology have largely eliminated from everyday experience. Following an unseen deity's guidance without visual verification or rational explanation requires faith expressions entirely different from modern religious practice with its comfortable buildings and intellectual theological frameworks. The physical reality of living off miraculous provision, manna appearing with morning dew, water flowing from rocks creates relationship with divine power that modern prosperity theology can only approximate through abstract financial blessing. The Battle of Jericho becomes horrifying physical confrontation rather than triumphant Sunday school narrative when imagined through bodily presence. Ancient warfare isn't clinical button pushing from safe distance but hand-to-hand combat requiring direct killing through physical contact. The 7 days of circling creates psychological warfare through anticipation, defenders watching strange behavior without understanding its purpose. Tension building with each completed circuit, uncertainty creating fear more debilitating than direct assault. When walls finally fall, what follows isn't bloodless victory, but close quarters slaughter with bronze weapons requiring multiple strikes to cause fatal damage. Combatants covered in others' blood and viscera. Screams of the dying creating audio landscape modern minds seldom encounter outside carefully constructed horror entertainment. The commanded destruction of entire populations, men, women, children, even animals, moves from abstract theological problem to immediate moral crisis when experienced as physical participation rather than distant reading. The period of the Judges, with its cycles of oppression and deliverance, reveals patterns of political reality that modern stable governance often obscures. Without professional military, police forces, or established judicial systems, communities rely on charismatic individual leadership emerging in response to specific threats. Samson's seemingly bizarre behaviors, riddles, honey in lion carcasses. Foxes with torches represent psychological warfare techniques, leveraging supernatural reputation to compensate for limited personnel and resources. Deborah's leadership combines military strategy, judicial authority, and prophetic guidance in ways modern specialized roles never integrate. These judges don't implement consistent constitutional governance, but provide contextual response to immediate threats. The cycles of apostasy, punishment, repentance, and deliverance aren't abstract theological patterns, but lived community experience, directly connecting religious observance with physical freedom or subjugation. Your modern expectation of stable governance systems, operating independently from religious practice, would find no corresponding reality in this period where divine relationship directly determines political experience. The Davidic monarchy, often romanticized through selective narrative emphasis, reveals practical political realities when experienced as contemporary rather than historical. David's rise from shepherd to king involves not just miraculous divine selection, but strategic alliance building. Military leadership demonstrating practical battlefield value and careful political maneuvering between competing tribal interests. His reign establishes Jerusalem as capital through military conquest rather than democratic selection processes. His famous moral failures, particularly with Bathsheba, and subsequent killing of Uriah, represent not just personal spiritual failures, but abuse of royal power without accountability structures modern governance attempts to establish through institutional checks and balances. The physical reality of absolute monarchy, one man's decisions determining thousands of lives without appeal process or representative input, creates political environment entirely foreign to modern democratic experience, even in its most flawed implementations. Solomon's legendary wisdom manifests not primarily through philosophical insight, but practical governance strategy, settling disputes, managing resources, establishing trade relationships, implementing taxation systems. His temple construction project, reduced to architectural details and theological significance in many readings, represents massive physical undertaking requiring labor forces pulled from agricultural production, resource extraction permanently altering landscapes, wealth concentration creating economic stratification. The temple's physical reality, specific dimensions, materials, furnishings matters as much as its theological significance. The literal weight of gold used, the specific species of woods imported, the exact measurements of spaces all create physical manifestation of cosmic order through precise material implementation. Your modern separation between symbolic meaning and physical embodiment would miss the essential unity these elements represented in biblical understanding, where physical precision directly expressed spiritual reality. The divided kingdom period illustrates political fragmentation patterns recognizable across historical contexts, but experienced without modern media explanation or historical perspective. Border regions change jurisdiction overnight through military conquest rather than negotiated agreements. Taxation policies shift with new leadership without representation or appeals process. Religious practices mandated by one regime become criminalized under another without constitutional protections for free exercise. These aren't abstract political science case studies, but immediate lived realities requiring practical adaptation for survival. The prophetic movements arising during this period, Elijah, Elisha, Amos, tested, Hosea, speak not from comfortable religious establishments, but from marginal positions challenging power structures directly, often at great personal risk. Their messages address immediate physical concerns, economic justice, religious corruption, international alliance dangers, rather than abstract theological concepts. Their methods, dramatic public demonstrations, symbolic actions, confrontational rhetoric, create physical manifestations of spiritual messages easily dismissed when reduced to literary texts alone. The Assyrian and Babylonian conquests transform from historical timeline entries to catastrophic lived experience when imagined physically rather than textually. Modern warfare, however devastating, includes international conventions, non-combatant protections, and reconstruction assistance. Ancient conquests operate without such constraints. Civilians experience the same violence as military forces. Women become explicit targets for sexual violence as standard practice. Children witness parents' execution before being marched hundreds of miles to unfamiliar territories. Exile isn't just geographical relocation, but complete identity dissolution. Language, religious practice, cultural expression all face systematic suppression designed to eliminate distinct identity within 3 generations. The psychological trauma of watching your city walls breached, temples desecrated, sacred objects carried away as trophies would create emotional and spiritual wounds modern therapeutic frameworks struggle to address. These aren't unfortunate historical events, but divine judgment physically manifested through geopolitical agencies, a theological interpretation modern secularism finds incomprehensible, but biblical worldview accepts as fundamental reality. The Persian period allows limited return and rebuilding, but under foreign supervision and approval, creating complex theological questions about divine action through pagan authorities. Ezra and Nehemiah implement religious and social reforms that modern pluralistic values would condemn as exclusionary and discriminatory, prohibiting intermarriage, enforcing ethnic separation, imposing religious conformity through community pressure. The physical rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls and temple occurs not through modern construction methods, but through community labor alongside constant threat of attack, creating unique social bonds formed through shared physical vulnerability and divine purpose. The returned exiles experience not triumphant restoration but partial, compromised rebuilding under foreign oversight, a pattern establishing theological frameworks for finding divine purpose within political subjugation that later Jewish and Christian communities would develop through subsequent imperial conquests. The intertestamental period, often skipped entirely in biblical education, establishes crucial physical contexts for New Testament events. Greek colonization introduces not just language changes but gymnasium culture, athletic competitions, philosophical schools, and architectural innovations that transform physical environments and social practices. The Maccabean revolt against Hellenistic suppression of Jewish practice creates martyrdom tradition, celebrating physical suffering for religious principle, mothers watching sons tortured to death, rather than violate kosher laws, families choosing execution over Sabbath desecration. The Hasmonean dynasty establishes briefly independent Jewish rule, but through military means and political compromise that religious purists consider spiritually compromised. The physical reality of Roman occupation taxation systems requiring detailed census participation, military presence controlling population movement, crucifixion as public torture and execution method creates immediate political context for messianic expectations far more complex than simple spiritual deliverance. The birth of Jesus occurs within this layered historical context, not in isolated stable with convenient animals and visiting shepherds. Mary experiences pregnancy without modern prenatal care, nutritional guidance, or pain management options. Her journey to Bethlehem in late pregnancy represents physical ordeal modern obstetricians would absolutely prohibit, jolting donkey transportation over rough roads, inadequate nutrition during travel, no proper medical support for delivery. Joseph navigates complex social dynamics of unexplained pregnancy without paternity testing, legal counsel, or clear divine guidance beyond dream experiences most modern believers would question as reliable instruction sources. Their displacement for census participation illustrates Roman administrative control prioritizing taxation, efficiency over human welfare, systems treating human bodies as revenue sources rather than persons with physical needs requiring accommodation. Jesus' ministry reveals physical dimensions, often spiritualized in contemporary religious interpretation. His healing miracles address not abstract spiritual conditions, but immediate bodily suffering, chronic bleeding, paralysis, leprosy, blindness, demonic possession manifesting through physical symptoms. His teaching occurs not in comfortable buildings with climate control and acoustic engineering, but in outdoor settings requiring voice projection without amplification. Physical stamina for extended speaking, adaptation to weather conditions and crowd management challenges. His itinerant lifestyle means constant walking between locations miles daily over unimproved terrain, regardless of weather conditions, without modern footwear or weather protection. Even his famous statements about considering lilies and birds reflect immediate physical surroundings visible to his audience during delivery rather than abstract philosophical concepts. The physical Jesus experiencing hunger, thirst, fatigue, pain demonstrates divine embodiment through normal human physical limitations rather than supernatural exemption from bodily reality. The crucifixion narrative gains horrifying immediacy when experienced physically rather than theologically. Roman crucifixion isn't simply execution, but torture designed specifically for maximum pain over extended time. Medical research indicates death typically occurs through asphyxiation, as chest muscles eventually fatigue beyond ability to facilitate breathing. Before reaching the crucifixion site, victims endure scourging with specialized whips containing metal or bone fragments designed to tear flesh from underlying muscle tissue. The crown of thorns creates not minor discomfort, but potential eye damage from dripping blood and significant cranial pain from thorns penetrating scalp tissue rich with nerve endings. Carrying the crossbeam, weighing 7,525 pounds after these physical traumas represents nearly impossible physical burden. Explaining Simon of Cyrene's forced recruitment. The actual crucifixion involves nails driven through wrists, not palms, which would tear under body weight and feet, creating nerve damage, producing extreme pain with every slight movement, including breathing itself. These aren't abstract, sacrificial concepts, but precise physical torture methods experienced through fully human nervous system and consciousness. The resurrection presents physical reality modern spiritualized Christianity often minimizes. Jesus' post-resurrection appearances emphasize bodily presence, inviting touch, eating fish, showing wound sites rather than spiritual manifestation lacking material substance. The disciples' transition from fear to bold proclamation reflects not just psychological change, but physical transformation of nervous systems, responding to embodied encounter with previously dead teacher, now physically present. Early Christian proclamation centers not on spiritual principles or ethical teachings, but specific claim of bodily resurrection, physical reality, so unexpected it transforms witnesses' willingness to risk their own bodies through persecution and martyrdom. The physical resurrection establishes theological foundation for Christian hope centered not on spiritual disembodiment, but eventual bodily resurrection, material continuation, rather than immaterial release from physical limitation. The early church develops through physical practices modern Christian spirituality often neglects. Communal meals form central organizing principle rather than belief statements or institutional structures. Baptism involves complete bodily immersion rather than symbolic water application. The Lord's Supper requires actual eating and drinking rather than symbolic observation. Worship includes full body expression, dance, prostration, embracing rather than primarily intellectual or emotional engagement. The physical sharing of resources addresses immediate bodily needs, hunger, shelter, clothing, rather than abstract spiritual concerns. Even doctrinal discussions focus primarily on proper understanding of Christ's physical nature, fully human and fully divine, rather than abstract theological concepts. This early Christian physicality reflects continued Jewish understanding of embodied spirituality, rather than Greek philosophical preference for spiritual reality transcending material limitation. As biblical narrative concludes with Revelation's apocalyptic imagery, physical dimensions often disappear behind symbolic interpretation and theological extrapolation. Yet even these vivid visionary experiences occur through embodied prophetic tradition, John physically present on Patmos. Experiencing vision through nervous system and sensory apparatus, recording through manual writing implements rather than digital dictation. The images themselves, however symbolic in meaning, derive from physical realities familiar to original audience, beasts combining recognizable animal features. Physical objects like scrolls and seals, geographical landmarks like mountains and rivers. The new heaven and new earth represent not spiritual realm replacing physical reality, but material transformation creating environments where bodily experience continues without current limitations and corruptions. The final biblical vision isn't escape from physical experience, but its ultimate perfection, bodies resurrected, physical creation renewed, material and spiritual fully integrated rather than artificially separated. This journey through biblical physicality reveals consistent pattern modern spiritual practice often neglects, the fundamental unity of material and spiritual reality in biblical worldview. Modern Western thinking inherits Greek philosophical dualism, separating physical experience, considered inferior, from spiritual reality, considered superior. Biblical understanding presents radically different perspective, physical creation as initially perfect divine expression temporarily corrupted, but ultimately restored rather than transcended. Spiritual meaning expresses through physical reality rather than despite it. Divine encounter occurs through embodied experience rather than escaping bodily limitation. Even heaven represents not disembodied spiritual existence, but transformed physical reality where material and spiritual achieve perfect integration. As you begin drifting towards sleep, perhaps this journey through biblical physicality offers invitation to reconsider modern assumptions about embodiment itself. Your body isn't obstacle to spiritual experience, but necessary vessel for encountering divine reality. Physical limitations aren't problems to overcome, but parameters within which authentic spirituality develops. Material needs food, water, shelter, rest aren't distractions from spiritual priorities, but divine gifts establishing rhythms through which spiritual insight becomes possible. The biblical world's intense physicality isn't primitive limitation, but holistic integration. Modern compartmentalization has artificially divided. Perhaps true spiritual wisdom begins not by transcending physical reality, but by embracing it more fully, recognizing divine presence manifesting through material creation rather than despite it. The biblical narrative continues flowing through history, through your own physical existence, through the very rhythms of breath, now slowing as sleep approaches. The same divine creative energy that shaped ancient worlds remains present in each heartbeat, each cellular process, each neural transmission, allowing consciousness itself. As modern distraction fades and ancient reality envelopes your imagination, perhaps the greatest spiritual insight emerges, not escape from physical limitation, but full embrace of embodied existence as divine gift, temporarily constrained by corruption but ultimately destined for complete restoration. The biblical world's physicality isn't foreign territory, but your own forgotten homeland. The integrated existence your fragmented modern experience unconsciously seeks through every attempt to reconnect body, mind, and spirit into the unified whole divine design originally intended.